Now finally we'll revise everything whatever we have discussed and draw a diagram ourselves. For the neck region, the fascia, the spaces and the nerves related there, everything almost. Let's do that. Our diagram will be something like this, and let us start with that. It is actually a transverse section of the neck. Again, you see, finally we are going to draw a transverse section of the neck and revise whatever we have discussed till now, the fascia, the spaces, the nerves, everything almost. So this is the diagram which we are about to draw, and let us do it. It is a transverse section of the neck region, and as you take a transverse section of the neck region, you will see the most superficial fascia was the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia. If you say it is the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia, then what is it doing? It is actually splitting and closing some muscle. And what are the muscle it is splitting and closing? There was sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius muscle. In that process, it was also forming the roof of the posterior triangle of the neck, because posterior triangle of neck is bounded by the two muscles. This will be forming the roof. Now, if you say investing fascia is forming the roof of the posterior triangle, then who is forming the floor? Let us find out. And you have to talk about the vertebra now. This is the vertebra. If you say this is the vertebra, then in front of the vertebra we have a fascia, and we are calling it as prevertebral fascia. This prevertebral fascia, which is in front of the vertebra, is not only in front of the vertebra but all around the vertebra and covering what is called as paravertebral muscles. Can you name some paravertebral muscles? Yeah, we will see that, but first you tell. It is now, see, this is the roof of the posterior triangle bounded by the two muscles, sternomastoid and the trapezius, and the floor will be the prevertebral fascia. And what is it covering? The muscles at the floor of the posterior triangle. What are the muscles at the floor of the posterior triangle? You remember there were two muscles. One is called scalenus anterior muscle, and there is scalenus medius muscle. And what is between the two? Interscalene triangle. There was some plexus, and we are calling it as the brachial plexus. Now this brachial plexus is going to pull the prevertebral fascia into the axilla, and it will become the axillary sheath. Now when you say that the prevertebral fascia is being pulled by the brachial plexus into axilla to become axillary sheath, it means axillary sheath is a continuation of the prevertebral fascia into the axilla to enclose not only the brachial plexus but also the axillary artery. But axillary vein will be outside the axillary sheath. This you remember. What are the other details? If you want to discuss the other details, you can draw the scalenus anterior muscle here and medius there. So scalenus anterior and scalenus medius on the other side. There was one more fascia which we have to discuss, and it was in front of the trachea here. If this is the trachea, then this must be the esophagus. The two tubes together, and as you are talking about them, you will find there is a fascia in front of trachea. That fascia which is in front of the trachea is called as pretracheal fascia, and this pretracheal fascia is anterolateral to the trachea and esophagus. If you say pretracheal fascia in front of the trachea is anterolateral to the trachea esophagus, what is happening posteriorly? Posteriorly, it will merge with what is called as buccopharyngeal fascia. So that will be the buccopharyngeal fascia, which is actually behind the pharynx and esophagus. Now, once you say that, fine. I think in front of the trachea there is the thyroid gland. Yes, it is. This is the lobes of the thyroid gland, and they are connected to each other by the isthmus of the thyroid gland. So this is the lobes of the thyroid gland and connected to each other by isthmus of the thyroid gland. And thyroid gland is also enclosed by the pretracheal fascia. Of course, the visceral layer of the pretracheal fascia covering the viscera, which is thyroid, trachea and esophagus. Now, once you say all that, fine. What about the carotid sheath? As you're talking about the carotid sheath, you will find this is the carotid sheath. And what is inside the carotid sheath? Inside the carotid sheath, we have got one artery on the inside. And where is the vein? Vein is on the outside. And what is between the two, behind the two? That is the vagus nerve. Now, if you say, this is the structure, you can name them. What is the artery inside? That was actually common carotid artery, later becoming internal carotid artery. And what is the vein which is lateral? That was the internal jugular vein. And what is the nerve between the two? That is the vagus nerve, which is between the two and behind the two. So this is the vagus nerve between the two, behind the two. And lateral is the internal jugular vein. And the medial is the common carotid artery. Later it will continue as the internal carotid artery, but all inside carotid sheath. Contributed by, anteriorly it is contributed by the pretracheal fascia, and posteriorly it is contributed by the prevertebral fascia, and laterally it is contributed by investing fascia. So carotid sheath is having three contributions, and lateral contribution, the investing fascia, posterior contribution, prevertebral fascia, and anterior contribution, the pretracheal fascia. And something is embedded anteriorly. What is embedded anteriorly? Embedded anteriorly is what is called as ansa cervicalis. If you say ansa cervicalis is embedded anteriorly to the carotid sheath, then what was behind the carotid sheath? It was here, sympathetic trunk. That is here, the sympathetic trunk, and you can do the sympathetic block, stellate ganglion block behind the carotid sheath. Now there are some other nerves which you have to discuss, and you already have known. In front of the scalenus anterior muscle is the phrenic nerve. If you say in front of the scalenus anterior muscle is the phrenic nerve, then it is covered by which fascia? The prevertebral fascia is covering the phrenic nerve on the scalenus anterior muscle there. Now we need to know one more nerve. You remember I told you the most posterior is the brachial plexus, and in front of that was the phrenic nerve, in front of that was the vagus nerve, in front of that was the ansa cervicalis, and still more in front is in the tracheoesophageal groove. And what is this nerve in the tracheoesophageal groove, which is actually covered by the pretracheal fascia? That was actually the recurrent laryngeal nerve, branch of the vagus nerve in the tracheoesophageal groove. I have also told that this pretracheal fascia is going to cover some muscles. So what are those muscles it is covering? Actually, they will be the anterior neck muscles. Remember, pretracheal fascia has various layers. One is called as the visceral layer of pretracheal fascia, and then is muscular layer of pretracheal fascia, and that muscular layer of pretracheal fascia is covering some strap muscles. The strap muscles, which are actually the anterior neck muscles. So anterior neck muscles are covered by the pretracheal fascia muscular component. So these are some of the details we wanted to discuss. We also want to know that the prevertebral fascia is splitting now. As it is splitting, you will find that the anterior layer is called alar fascia. If you say this is the alar fascia, which is the anterior splitting of the prevertebral fascia, then this is the, you will find that this is the prevertebral fascia, which is splitting to give you anterior layer, which is called alar fascia. Then this will be the proper prevertebral fascia. If this is the prevertebral fascia proper, then what is the space between the two? The space between the two, let us see now actually some spaces. You see, between the two is the danger space. Now if you say this is a danger space which is due to splitting of the prevertebral fascia into anterior alar fascia and posterior prevertebral fascia proper, then what is the space in front of the vertebra? This space which is in front of the vertebra is prevertebral space. So in front of the vertebra we have prevertebral space, in front of that prevertebral fascia proper, in front of that danger space, in front of that you have the alar fascia part of prevertebral fascia, in front of that is some space behind the pharynx. And what is that space behind the pharynx? The space which is behind the pharynx will be the retropharyngeal space. If that is the retropharyngeal space behind the pharynx, then what is the more anterior thing? It is the buccopharyngeal fascia. Buccopharyngeal fascia. So anterior to posterior, that will be first of all, lumen of the pharynx may be esophagus. So lumen of the pharynx may be esophagus. Yes. Behind that, buccopharyngeal fascia. Behind that, retropharyngeal space. And behind that is the alar fascia. Behind that, danger space. Behind that, the prevertebral fascia proper. Behind that, prevertebral space. And behind that, vertebra. So we have discussed three spaces, three fascia. Yes, that is what we have done. So that is all we want to discuss here.